Good evening and thanks for joining us on the Week in Review. I'm Nick Blumberg. Mourners from around the country come to Chicago to pay final respects to the Reverend Jesse Jackson.
The most consequential leader this country's had in the latter part of the 20th century and the beginning of the 21st century. He raised a generation of us to deal with activism, and he never gave up.
Thousands of visitors descend on Rainbow Push headquarters as Jackson lies in repose, ahead of a week of memorial celebrations.
The golden age of America is upon us.
6 Illinois Democrats skip the longest ever State of the Union.
The residents of the city of Chicago overwhelmingly believe the Bears should remain in the city.
Sorry, Chicagoans. Indiana Governor Mike Braun signs into law a measure aimed at building a stadium in northwest Indiana, as Springfield's bill aimed at keeping the Bears in Illinois faces headwinds. Meantime, a Cook County contractor accuses Treasurer Maria Pappas of verbal abuse. And Chicago's borrowing costs rise as the city faces a credit downgrade. And now to our Week in Review panel. Joining us are Quinn Myers of Block Club Chicago, freelance journalist Kim Bellware, A.D. Quigg of the Chicago Tribune, and Christian Farr of NBC5. Thank you all for being here. Let's get right to it. So Christian Farr, Reverend Jackson lay in repose from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. yesterday, as well as today. I don't think anybody expected this to be a small affair, but it really has been a remarkable turnout down there.
Remarkable. I mean, hundreds of people coming through, and people actually flying in from Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., Dallas, Texas, to pay their respects to a man who they believe sort of guided them down the path of activism. So we heard a lot of stories yesterday about how he was touched by the work that he did, not only here in Chicago, but across the nation, across the globe. I had the opportunity to interview him several times, and I mean, unfortunately, towards the end, he could barely get any words out, but he was still on the front lines doing work, and it was great to hear all of that.
Yeah, it was interesting how many people came in who had a personal story with him. You know, he really touched so many individual lives.
Yeah, and I mean, there were so many big names who came through as well. I mean, you saw the Reverend Al Sharpton who was standing there. You see that all of his children were there as well. I mean, this is a man who, you know, was a civil rights icon, followed the teachings of Dr. Martin Luther King, and just continued that all the way up to the end when he had that rare brain disease, which we thought was Parkinson's. And I remember the last time that I got to interview him, he couldn't get those words out, but you knew that he wanted to say something. So he's going to be honored for a very long period of time. You know, we're going to have that House of Hope celebration next week.
I've loved all the personal stories, especially from older Black Chicagoans who really grew up with Jesse Jackson and his mantra, "I am somebody." And we've been hearing a lot of these stories of, you know, him visiting high schools in the 70s and these really impactful stories. And so that's been really kind of a silver lining maybe of this whole week. Yeah, we got to hear from someone yesterday who remembered Jesse Jackson and Harold Washington visiting her high school back in the 70s, which was cool.
I was talking to some other fellow Chicago journalists, and one of them said, "Am I the only person who doesn't have a photo with Reverend Jesse Jackson?"
I don't have a photo.
I was gonna say. But there is something, you know, so many people, whether you were working in journalism or you were just somebody who did community work, civic engaged Chicagoans, you know, they had some interaction, or you saw him at a breakfast, at a protest, and he has this iconic status, but at the same time, he really was kind of your neighbor. You you could count on seeing him. I mean, I think even last summer, he was coming out to events at the University of Chicago for students that were hosting protests there, and it was difficult for him to speak. You know, his aides had to help him. They had a microphone, and he was still doing that, you know, that mantra that everybody has now come to really find so powerful.
Yeah, and A.D., it was interesting, you know, given Jackson's sort of legendary status, you saw some folks at the funeral that weren't always quite so friendly with him. We saw, you know, former Mayor Emanuel today, members of the Daley family yesterday, but he really drew everybody in.
Yeah, I think regardless of where they landed, I think anyone that fought with him understood what he was trying to do was ultimately good for the city and won everyone's respect, despite the battles along the way. It's been really interesting to hear, legacy-wise, of course, his family is continuing a lot of that tradition, but also, like, he was the reason, not only symbolically, but logistically, that Barack Obama became our president, the way he changed the rules at the DNC. I think there's going to be so many books, of course, are going to be written about all the different ways that he touched so many people and movements.
Yeah,
I think black newscasters have to thank him. I'm not from here, but we celebrate him because he fought to get black women on there. He fought to get women on the air. So you really have to give him credit for what he did.
Yeah, in this whole last week plus has just been kind of one arena after another that almost so many accomplishments that you can be forgiven for forgetting some of them, because what a life. All right, well, one event several local Democrats didn't attend, AD, was the State of the Union. Others brought some guests aimed at highlighting their opposition to the president's agenda. So a little bit of a split approach there in how the Dems handle Trump.
Right, yeah, I was surprised. Well, maybe not surprised. It was noteworthy how many people skipped. The State of the Union is such like an institution that even if you hate who's up there, you're expected to go anyway. But a lot of Democrats, we had Senator Duckworth, Delia Ramirez, Mike Quigley, Sean Casten, Jan Schakowsky, Eric Sorensen all skip, and everyone else in the Illinois delegation brought a guest that they said kind of highlighted the shortcomings of the Trump administration.
Yeah, we saw Maramar Martinez there, shot by federal agents, among several others, aimed at protesting the president's immigration.
Right,
crackdown.
everything from immigration to healthcare, cost of living. They were trying to kind of make a show of it, and I know there were some commentators who were like, Democrats should have skipped the whole thing anyway. And we saw the most notable quote of the evening was President Trump calling Democrats crazy.
Yeah, he was not shy about sharing his feelings on Dems. Kim, we didn't hear necessarily that much in the way of a legislative agenda, as you often do in the State of the Union. But, is that necessarily surprising given the president's sort of, headstrong approach that he's really trying to consolidate a lot of power within the executive?
I mean, not necessarily. And you also think of there has been a lot of pressure on the Trump administration, particularly over the immigration enforcement that's been going on here in Minneapolis, other cities around the country. And just, generally what we're seeing, we have conflicts with Iran, we have all sorts of things that are giving people a lot of worry about the future. Is he living up to these promises that he set forth when he ran for re-election? And so there's a little bit of damage control. This is the time for him to more say, I'm doing a good job, you should still trust me. And I'm not surprised that we didn't hear a very clear idea of what the legislative agenda is going to be going forward. What I do think is interesting, and I would love to know what you all think, is based on who some of the Democrats brought, does that reveal what they're going to focus on, as we head towards the midterms, because it's about affordability, it's about immigration, it's about a lot of these issues that Democrats have some leverage on.
Yeah, what do we think? Are we getting a preview of the agenda here?
I mean, definitely, especially from, Chuy Garcia brought Maramar Martinez, who was shot 5 times, charged with assaulting federal agents. That case, of course, fell apart pretty quickly, and then she pushed in court for a lot of evidence to be made public, which it was, showing that she did not assault federal agents, right? So I think that is a quick, easy way for the Democrats to rebut the immigration enforcement that we've been seeing here in Minneapolis, and definitely we're going to see more high-profile, people coming up like that.
Yeah. But it seems like the president's really focused on voting,
right.
And taking control.
Right, nationalizing
with
yeah.
that possible executive order, what's going to happen next and hitting that campaign trail. So that's, I think, some of the concerns that Americans might have.
Absolutely. Well, Quinn, one thing that Kim mentioned briefly that's on a lot of folks' minds, there's this huge military buildup in the Middle East. President had some tough words for Iran, but didn't really spend a lot of time on it. Were you surprised that it almost felt like he glossed over it?
I wasn't surprised, but I did, was kind of waiting to see if maybe strikes would start during or after the speech. Trump likes the theater of something like that, and I could almost imagine him literally ordering strikes from a State of the Union. Wouldn't be totally surprising to me. But there seems to be a lot of conflicting messaging coming out of the Trump administration on Iran. Do they have the capability to make a missile to strike the U.S. in a week? Is it in a year? We're hearing a lot of different strategies and intelligence here, and clearly they are getting ready to possibly strike. So I think it's maybe not that important in Trump's stump speech that was part of the State of the Union, but it's certainly a huge factor. And again, it could be happening at any moment. We just don't know.
We sure don't. That seems like a running theme this last year. Christian, some other international news. You spoke with Chicagoans who were caught up in violence in Mexico after the death of a major cartel leader. What did you hear from them?
Yeah, El Mencho, and these are people who were in Puerto Vallarta, Guadalajara, which is 200 miles away, but there was still reaction to that from the cartels. We spoke to one of our former Telemundo journalists, Ben Zamora, who's now an independent journalist. He was just down there bringing his wife for medical treatment and trying to get back to the airport. and they saw carjackings, they saw bombings, and it was even a concern if they were going to be able to fly back to Las Vegas where they live. And then you have people who, we spoke to a woman who vacationed there for pretty much an entire month, and now her flight got delayed on the day that we spoke to her, and she's supposed to go back on March 3rd. I have no idea, but she saw buses being blown up. She said the targets really weren't the tourists, it's more so the military who executed this operation, which has now sort of caused this cartel retaliation. And then, there's fighting for leadership positions that are going on. So, there are people questioning whether I should go to Mexico right now. I've got some friends who, we're going to vacation there in a few weeks, going to Cancun, not next door to where this is all happening. But, there's a concern. Is Mexico safe?
You might have seen the story about the couple that was supposed to get married, and I think in Guadalajara, and they are now getting married, I think, today or tomorrow in Chicago. They planned a whole new wedding here in 4 days. So kudos to them, although I'm sure that was extremely stressful.
And a former state rep who was carjacked. I mean, and then chased. He was with his husband and he was chased with a man with a gun, and then they had to hide in an orphanage. I mean, these are really scary situations.
Yeah, it's very, seems quite unstable right now, and certainly a lot of folks questioning what the right move is. All right, something else that's continuously unstable this week on the Bears Stadium soap opera. Indiana's governor signing into law a measure to create a state stadium authority. A lot of people seem to be treating this like it's a done deal.
Oh, no.
They're jumping to conclusions.
They haven't been paying attention to the past. How long have we been dealing with Bears back?
A long time.
No, this is not done. We obviously saw dueling announcements with Indiana's announcement and then state. Governor Pritzker has softened on this a bit. He said we might be able to make infrastructure work. We could do a payment in lieu of taxes to potentially get you to Arlington Heights. At the same time, you have a dueling Chicago delegation who says we don't want them going anywhere. We have the Park District getting involved. Nothing is certain when it comes to where the Bears are going to be.
It does seem like the Chicago delegation is a distant third, though, at this point. We have Indiana and Arlington Heights, which the state legislators are working on negotiating the Arlington Heights deals. And Chicago's like, wait a second, what about us? And everyone else is kind of like, sorry,
yeah,
you had
I
your
definitely
chance.
think they're third, but I do think they're very influential in what they can allow to stop and go in Springfield.
Right,
Yes,
they
that's
may
very
be able to sort of put pressure on them for a sweetener of some kind, even if they know the stadium deal, the stadium deal is not going to happen in the city.
Right, well, and the sweetness is the big thing. What is going to pencil out for the Bears? Is it having control of a site like they want in Arlington Heights? Is it getting as many incentives as possible like they want in Indiana? Or is it that skyline central location that they want in Chicago?
The sweetness, a Walter Payton joke, I have to assume, or was that
No!
That was meant to be, my friend.
That was a good catch.
Well, and Kim, we saw former Governor Pat Quinn, the master of the petition drive, with the call.
Nobody loves a clipboard more than former Governor Pat
The great
Quinn.
state of Illinois.
And God love him for it. But he's trying to get the Bears owners to stay in Illinois. Does it feel like the team's owners are listening right now to what the fans have to say, or is this or to how all the fans that signed the petition at least?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know. This is one of those things where I keep thinking I'm maybe more fixated on all of the financial challenges that the city has already. What kind of money are leaders willing to part with? And also, I keep thinking, as we were talking about earlier, Toyota Park and Bridgeview, that didn't work out so well for the village. And most stadiums are not great return on investments. Do Bears fans in the southwest suburbs, are they just as happy driving to Hammond as they are to Arlington Heights, maybe?
It'd be interesting to see if they can get some money out of Springfield to at least do some upgrades at Soldier Field.
But Pat Quinn is out there representing those interests of those who do not want Hammond Hoosiers. So there is.
And you know what?
And we thank him for that.
We thank him for his service, absolutely. All right, AD, a pretty explosive charge this week.
I thought you were going to say explicit.
No, well, also that.
Yeah.
Yes, and from a Cook County contractor alleging abuse by Treasurer Maria Pappas. What's the backstory there?
The backstory goes back about 10 years when Tyler Technologies, an outside contractor, was brought in to update the county's property tax system, which involves several offices, tons of data, very old computers. It has gotten a lot tenser in the last year since my colleague at Injustice Watch, David Jackson, and I reported on how expensive and delayed this has been. Everyone knows that property tax bills were delayed. Everyone that runs a city in the suburbs knows how late revenue distributions were. So they have been Treasurer Pappas has been like the chief adversary of Tyler, saying, we should fire you, we should sue you, I don't like anything you're doing, and that's putting it very mildly. And for the most part, Tyler has been diplomatic and pushed back against her, but a straw broke last week when apparently the treasurer had a conversation with a leader at Tyler using some heated language, calling her an idiot with a modifier in front of that that we can't say on air, and threatening to go to Tyler's board and explain what a terrible job they've done. So the CEO of Tyler essentially said, no one on the team is going to talk to you anymore. You've been banned. The only person you could talk to at Tyler now is me, and we're going through an intermediary from now on.
Very interesting. I mean, it's certainly, she's known for being outspoken, having, kind of a headstrong personality, but often kind of a happy warrior type of person, more than someone who seems like they would get this, sort of abusive potentially.
Yeah, no, I've interviewed her several times, and she's always, happy-go-lucky with the bright jackets on every time. So, I mean, but this is also not surprising when you hear some things in the background about her as well.
Yeah.
What she said is, I'm standing up for my staff who's getting screamed at every day by taxpayers who are mad about the late bills, are mad about not getting refunds, of which there are 180 something outstanding. So there are people who have been waiting and waiting for these refunds. So she's like, I'm standing up for my staff, I'm standing up for the taxpayers, and I'm not backing down.
And I think you made a great point in your report on this. Her name is in those great big letters on all the envelopes that, Cook County homeowners get. So it's her name that people are associating with, the bills, the lack of disbursements, anything that goes wrong. So I can appreciate why she
and she's always the first one to give you warnings about property tax.
Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, she's the first one.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, it was interesting, though, Quinn, given that these firms rely on government contracts for their businesses, that they came out and, made such a stand against her.
They were pushed maybe to a breaking point here, it seems like, and this has become political in many senses. I mean, Brendan Riley, who's running against Tony Preckwinkle, has repeatedly brought up Tyler Technologies and said he might axe them, get them out of the county. Another charge that was allegedly said by Maria Pappas, she allegedly called one candidate a token Hispanic, I believe.
Token Latino.
Token Latino. Again, these are just allegations, but I think maybe some of the racially charged language maybe elevated more than just a simple FU.
Yeah, and the way she explained that statement was she was warning this leader, the chief administrative officer of Tyler, I don't want the other corporate leaders at Tyler to treat you like a token Latino. That was her explanation of that one.
Well, AD, sticking with you for a minute, Chicago's credit rating downgraded this week, not one but two agencies. Go us. What did we hear by way of explanation?
The same thing that we've been hearing for a very long time from these ratings agencies. The city needs to do more to have structural solutions to fill its budget gaps. The out years are looking very bad. And for the first time we heard the infighting between the mayor and the city council is leading to a lot of uncertainty. That basically gives these two agencies, Kroll and Fitch, who are usually like a little less cynical about the city, a little bit more optimistic that they could turn things around, a reversal essentially, saying like, you guys are giving us no signs that you're going to fix it. And of course, as soon as the downgrades came out, we saw more of the infighting that, again, told ratings agencies, the mayor and the city council are not quite there yet on finding something that's really going to fix the city's long-term fiscal picture.
Sort of a vicious credit rating cycle there.
Absolutely.
I mean, Christian, how quickly do you think we'll see this in, anti-Johnson campaign ads?
Oh, I think pretty quickly. I mean, people are. You go online and just look who's going to be the next mayor of Chicago. Yeah. It's not Mayor Brandon Johnson. That's not what a lot of people are thinking right now. And so, we just have to kind of wait and see.
It's interesting. Chicago is supposed to be a weak mayor, strong council form of government, but apparently that's not what all the ratings agencies actually want to see. All right, Quinn, jury this week leveled a $5.7 million verdict in an excessive force case over a botched CPD raid in 2018. Remind us about that incident.
Right, this was a family in back of the yards. CPD was executing a warrant for a man who ended up actually not living in this property. And they used a flashbang and allegedly, or I guess it was proved by the court, pointed assault rifles at children. So this family sued and said this was excessive force. And interestingly, instead of settling, often the law department will settle to, reduce risk to the taxpayers. They went to court and went to trial with this. And then they lost $5.7 million that they're going to have to pay out, although they are likely going to appeal. It seems they haven't totally said if they're going to or not. So it raises kind of the question, are there other cases out there, and what are the policies that existed then back in 2018? What's been changed? I think those are kind of some of the larger oversight questions that we're having.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting, Kim, to see they said in the ruling, the city knew, or in the jury's verdict rather, that the city knew officers were routinely violating the rights of Chicagoans when serving warrants. Is that something that could potentially arise in other cases if they're setting this precedent? Yeah, I mean, a case like this also, for reformers, it can be really frustrating because this is something that happened, in 2018. Even if there have been changes, the Anjanette Young trial, or the Anjanette Young raid that happened a year later, a lot of these issues were very similar as far as how CPD was operating, things that we later saw from body camera footage. And even if there are reforms, the city is still going to be grappling with those mistakes from 7 years ago, 8 years ago, and it can be difficult to sometimes resummon that will again to figure out, can we keep this going in a positive direction? Because every time you think you're making some progress, we're reminded just how far and how badly things have been damaged.
Yeah. I mean, the Anjanette Young case got a lot of media attention. Why wasn't this settled? And I think that's a question. And I think, there's a lot of payouts for all these wrongful convictions as well. And I think that is on the minds of a lot of people in the city of Chicago, because all this money is going out and not enough is coming back in. And we still hear names decades later, John Burge and Ronald Watts and Ronaldo Guevara. There's a long and sad history there. All right, Edie, some dispiriting news this week for our friends over at WGN. 9 on-air folks laid off, as well as 3 people from creative services. Several others reassigned to a new hub in Nashville. Were you surprised to see such a huge change all at once?
Not only the huge change, but the names of the folks that got laid off. I couldn't believe these are like storied veterans that Chicagoans have been seeing on their TVs for a very long time. Not surprised that media layoffs continue. This is a pretty depressing industry we've chosen.
Yes,
and it feels like every other week there's some kind of depressing news, which Kim knows well.
Yeah. Well, indeed. The other thing that it made me think of, WGN's parent company, they're trying for a merger. Of course, there's this huge potential Paramount buyout, where they'll own CNN and CBS. Is there any reversing this era of, cutbacks and consolidation?
I don't know. I'm feeling very pessimistic about it for a lot of different reasons. But when I think specifically, with WGN, this media consolidation, like you were all saying, these are storied names. We know that there's a lot of challenges for linear television, a lot of changing habits. And at the same time, trust in local media. Local media is so important for your information ecosystem. And if you're a Chicagoan who grew up with these names, with these faces, that is really important goodwill. It does seem foolish to get rid of that, especially if there weren't apparent financial challenges. This was maybe a little more strategic. And just, this is what I have always appreciated how local media makes a place feel distinct. Mm-hmm. WGN has such a wonderful history in this city, even after, it was no longer under Tribune Publishing. That is a strong local brand, and it is why the Chicago market feels distinct from other places. And it reshapes how Chicagoans are going to get their news when you have fewer veterans, fewer trusted faces, delivering that.
Yeah, and that specific station, that is a station that has probably the most news on in Chicago. Yeah. Julian Cruz, Sean Lewis, Braun. These are journalists I run into on the street, and we talk about stories and we help each other out. This is a wonderful market. I worked in Philadelphia, which is very cutthroat. We used to hide behind buildings to keep people from getting sources. But when you came here, we all worked together. I remember going to Springfield for the first time, and former political reporter Charles Thomas guided me through how I was supposed to go. Like, I had no idea where I was going.
And that is a confusing Capitol building.
It was very confusing. I'm in the basement. I'm like, where do I go next? And he showed me everything that I needed to do and who I should talk to. And he's working for the competition. I'm working for NBC. And that's Chicago. It's just a great market. My father-in-law worked at WGN for 40 plus
I watched
years.
him night after
yes,
night.
you know, and so
And there's something about seeing people's faces that's like bylines, whatever. But like seeing someone's face night after night, like that is a different kind of trust than almost any other medium.
Totally.
Yeah. It is inviting someone into your home. And it's interesting, you always hear that, you know, people distrust the media generally, but their local news, that's who they go for. That's who they trust. And I trust the four of you implicitly. Thank you for being here. But
We trust you too.
Thank
We do.
you. We are out of time though, so our thanks to Quinn Myers, Kim Bellware, A.D. Quigg, and Christian Farr. And we're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Polk Brothers Foundation. Additional support is provided by
And that's our show for this Friday night. Stay connected with our reporters and what they're working on by following us on Instagram at WTTW Chicago. Now for the Week in Review, I'm Nick Blumberg. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy, stay safe, and stay informed. Have a great weekend. All right, well, a lot of us once spent our weekends at the Double Door, and we were hoping for a revival. What's going on with that?
Well, they've been trying to reopen, the Wicker Park nightclub in Uptown, and they got a big city grant to do it, and it just didn't work for a variety of reasons. The grant has been returned, so maybe there will be a Double Door in the future, but right now, not happening.
Someplace else? Or?
They're doing some partnerships, smaller stuff, but they're not reopening a standalone Double Door anytime soon.
I mean, maybe if they can get the brand alive. That's something that still has a
start
lot of
booking
cachet.
shows,
I'll
definitely.
never get over it becoming a Yeti, which is gone too.
Right, the Yeti's gone.
Yeti?
It became a Yeti.
It was.
It was a
store.
Yeti. The Yeti is coming gone.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm, righting the heaviest wrongs for more than 40 years.